The future of Chelsea has just taken a massive twist. Or has it? Enzo Maresca will be the next Chelsea manager, as Fabrizio Romano has pretty much confirmed, and he's beaten the likes of Zerbi and McKenna to replace Pochettino at Chelsea, who obviously recently agreed to leave. Obviously, Maresca had a very impressive spell at Leicester last season after winning the championship, but the question is, how will he do at Chelsea? And I'm going to have a look at the potential lineup that he could use and the tactics we might see from his Chelsea team. So who is Enzo Maresca? Well, the 44-year-old Italian is the manager, or well, formerly the manager of Leicester City, who obviously went and won the championship last season after a very impressive campaign. Granted, it got a bit touchy at the end, but they still managed to do it. However, Maresca's managerial career actually started out at the development squad at Manchester City, where he took them to the top of the Premier League 2 multiple times with the likes of Cole Palmer and Romeo Lavia in his squad. He did also have a bit of a managerial spell in the Serie B for Parma, where, to be fair, he managed likes of Gianluigi Buffon, but after not getting them promoted back to the Serie A, he was, to put it nicely, sacked. But Pep Guardiola happily took him back to Man City as an assistant coach, and obviously that's where he's learned his philosophy of high possession, quick passing style of football, which he used at Leicester. And then, as I said, he obviously went to Leicester last season, and he had a pretty impressive campaign where they won the championship. But the question is, will he live up to the previous Italians that have managed Chelsea? It seems to be that there's a bit of history with Chelsea and Italian managers. You look at Ancelotti, obviously Sarri won the Europa League, Conte won the league, and Di Matteo won the Champions League. So will Maresca be able to live up to that expectation? Probably not, straight away at least, is the answer. But let's have a look at the potential team that Maresca might use when he comes to Chelsea. So Maresca lines his teams up in a 4-3-3, pretty traditional, but there's a heavy emphasis of playing out from the back, and obviously therefore a confident goalkeeper is needed. Now at Leicester, Mads Hermansson was the goalkeeper, and he ranks in the top 6% for passing accuracy in the championship last year with 83.1%. And I think most of the Chelsea goalkeepers at the moment aren't exactly the same profile that I think Maresca would want. Petrovic obviously is a pretty good shot stopper, but not the best with the ball. Kepa's the opposite. And Sanchez is just rubbish regardless. So I do think that they are going to sign a new goalkeeper. I looked at a fair few options. The likes of Bento, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Paranaense in Brazil, Martin Bolker at Nice, and James Trafford at Burnley, who we've been linked to as well recently. But I narrowed it down to a couple options. Now, I think the cheaper option is actually probably Miles Villar at Roma. I think he's had a really good season at Roma, so he did impress me. But the one that I've gone with, and it's a little bit more expensive, I think, but I do think he's the best option for us, is Diogo Costa, as he comes in to the goalkeeping spot. I just think for me, he is the best option, and I think he will suit the Maresca style of football pretty well. When we get into the tactics, you'll see more as to why. Now, whilst I said that the team lines up in a 4-3-3, in transition, there's actually a heavy use of one of the fullbacks inverting into the midfield. And like we saw Cucurella doing under Pochettino towards the end of Pochettino's spell last season, I think we're going to do something similar, but on the other side. So, for me, it's what right back can invert. And to be fair, I think Gusto and James will both be pretty good at it. But I've just gone with Reece James because he's Reece James. Now, granted, he sometimes loses his head and gets sent off, but I do think that is probably the best option for right back. And obviously, as I said, he will end up becoming a bit more of a midfielder at times in transition, which maybe you lose a bit of his attacking ability on the right wing position, but I think that he could play that CDM role pretty well. Now, also at Leicester, Vestergaard and Fias have been very front-footed, aggressive centre-backs, and I think that Maresca's probably going to go with something similar, and I'm going to assume that Chalobah is sold for this lineup. I have a feeling he will go in the summer, so I've not included him. So for me, the best centre-back pairing, and you might even forget that this man exists, Wesley Fofana, and then I've gone with Levi Colwill as the other centre-back. I just think they're both very good forward-thinking centre-backs who can are pretty good on the ball, but also very quick. And I think their recovery pace will be pretty essential to how this team will play. And then at left-back, I have gone with Cucurella. Again, as I said, he was doing the inverting under Pochettino, but I think this time the reason I've gone with him is because he can play the left centre-back in a back three and do it relatively well. But I do think there could be a variation of this, and that's actually Colwill at left back and Badiashile coming in here, similarly for the same thing. Whoever's playing left back in transition will end up playing the left centre back of a back three, and we've seen Colwill sometimes play that left back role as well as centre-back. So I think he's a good hybrid option that could play both. But for me, the best option is this. And I think that's probably what he will go for. I do, however, think a centre-back is needed, but I'll cover that a bit later. I do think that that's a strong defensive partnership, but a better centre-back could be better. Now, going into the midfield, again, it's a 4-3-3, but I'm going to switch some things up a little bit to what we've seen at Leicester before. I'm going to start off pretty basic, and I'm going to go with where Ndidi played at Leicester. Now, Ndidi played in the right of a midfield three. I've actually now gone for the left of a midfield three for the similar profile. Now, Ndidi got 4 goals and 5 assists at Leicester last season, which obviously is very impressive. He's shown that he's more than just a holding midfielder. He actually has some attacking output as well. And I think the best player to replicate this is actually Moises Caicedo, but I'm playing him in the left position where Dewsbury Hall technically played. So I'm switching things up a little bit. I think Caicedo's a really good player and similar to what Ndidi could do. I think he's good enough to be a box-to-box. And obviously, whilst we've seen him more as a holding midfielder, he can push forward and has done some good attacking moments throughout this season. You think, obviously, the goal was ruled out, but that volley against Spurs in that 4-1 win, he pushed really high and got a good opportunity and he took it. So I think he is capable of doing that. And I think Maresca can do something with him like what we've seen from Ndidi. Moving on to the middle of the midfield three, and I have gone with this man right here, Enzo Fernandez. Now, I know he's not really a defensive midfielder, but Enzo Maresca likes to use a deep line playmaker, and at Leicester that has been Harry Winks, and he's actually been brilliant. Now, whilst I know he's playing in a bit of a deeper role and he's not necessarily the best at defending, I think that it works because, similar to Harry Winks, they defend with 5 men. They defend the transition with 5 men, which is the 3 centre-backs, the inverted full-back, and then obviously, in this situation, Enzo Fernandez. Now, I'm not saying Enzo Fernandez can't push forward and maybe do what Ndidi's done, but I actually just think that as that player that keeps the ball ticking, keeps passing, maintains possession, Enzo Fernandez is pretty much one of the best in the world that you can get for that. So surely he takes that position. And now going into the right of a midfield three, and this is where things are about to get interesting, I'm actually going with Cole Palmer, and I know what you're thinking. That is crazy. Now, I'd like to say one thing. Actually, I want to say a couple things. First of all, when Maresca was at the Man City youth squad, he actually sometimes played a midfield three of Lavia as the holding midfielder, with then James McAtee, however you want to pronounce it, and Cole Palmer as the 2 attacking-minded central midfielders. So he has done it before. And also, when you look at what Dewsbury Hall has done at Leicester, he averages something crazy like 5 shot creating actions a game, and no one at Chelsea is anywhere near that except for Cole Palmer. And I think that he could do a similar role in this position, and it doesn't require much defensive responsibility, because when we look at the tactics, he's actually going to spend a lot of his time pushed much higher up the pitch. My only concern with this is how it would defend in a lower block. Again, when we look at the tactics, you'll kind of see the different suggestions that I might put forward, but in defence, I don't love him playing a centre midfield role. So obviously that's where you lose a little bit of his ability. But I also want to point out, if I could, I would have Gallagher here, but I'm pretty sure Gallagher's going to go this summer, so obviously I've just immediately ruled that option out. But keep an eye on Carney Chukwuemeka. I think he could also do this role pretty well, given a bit of time. Now, moving into the left wing position. Now, at Leicester, obviously it's been Mavididi, and he's had a great season. In fact, he averages 2.21 shots a game and 3.83 crosses a game. So you need someone that's pretty good at staying wide and putting a cross into the box, but also is capable of cutting inside and taking a shot. And actually, when you look at the stats, Sterling is much better in this position. And yet I'm going to do something crazy and I'm not going to put Sterling in here. Something about this just screams Mudryk for me. And I don't know how to explain it other than I just think that the young, fast dribbling that he can add to this team is different to what Sterling would add. Now, yes, I think Sterling's probably better cutting inside and shooting, but I think just his overall impact in this team, Mudryk works better. So I've gone with Mudryk. And on the right wing, not really a surprise, I've gone with Madueke. In this 3-2-5 system that we saw Pochettino use at the end of the season, Madueke played as that right midfielder or that right winger in the 3-2-5 transition, and it's shown off his brilliant 1 versus 1 ability, which is crucial to how Maresca uses his wingers. So I think Madueke is almost perfect. Again, he can cut inside and go wide and maybe put a cross into the box. Obviously left-footed as well. So you've got a left-footed player on the right and a right-footed player on the left. So they have to be pretty versatile, crossing with their weak foot and cutting in and shooting with their strong foot. I think both of them are very good at that. So I think that they're the best options. At Leicester, we saw Fatawu playing that right wing role. In fact, I think both him and Madueke average about the mid 2.5-ish shots per game. And actually, Madueke has a much higher shot on target rate. So I think he'd be even better in this position. And going into the striker role, I spent ages on this. I cannot decide. I actually think if you want someone that plays a bit more like Vardy, then you're going to go with someone like Nkunku. Whereas if you want someone a bit more that can hold up the play, and I don't know how to maybe make some runs in behind, you're probably going to want someone that's a bit more like Daka or Iheanacho is at Leicester. So I think it actually could vary. My favourite option is Christopher Nkunku. I just think he's too good to not play in this team. He could obviously play in different positions, but for me, I think he starts up front. The question is, though, how do you get Nicholas Jackson in this team? Obviously, Nicholas Jackson had a brilliant end to the last season, and despite all his criticisms, he's actually been really good. So there are a couple variations that I think we could look at, and the first of which, actually, that I'm going to talk about is how you'd get Romeo Lavia into this squad. And for me, I actually think it might be the like of Madueke that come out. Palmer would then go right mid, Fernandes into this position, and Lavia plays as the holding midfielder. Would this work as well? I don't know. I actually think I prefer that midfield three with Lavia, Caicedo and Enzo. But then you obviously lose that attacking-minded midfielder that Palmer would offer. I also do think, going back to how it was, that Nkunku could play this role as well, and then maybe Palmer off the right and Jackson up the top. You could see something like that. Also, Jackson could play at the left, Nkunku up top, and again, Lavia could come in. Maybe you just swap Mudryk for Jackson, or you could see this as well. I think there's a lot of variations that could go on with this team. For the most part, I think this would be my favourite lineup. And I know a few of you will be raising your heads at that. I just think it's the strongest lineup out of everyone we've got. Now, obviously, as I said, I think some signings will be needed. Obviously, a goalkeeper, whether it's Costa or not, I think will be essential. I think a new centre-back, and a player that I really like is Araujo at Barcelona. I think he could come in and play the right centre-back role really well if Fofana is still a bit of an injury concern. And also a number 9. I mean, we need a number 9 desperately. I think, obviously, the favoured option is probably Osimhen. Will it happen? I'm not totally convinced. My preference would be Victor Gyökeres, but again, will it happen? I don't know. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I think regardless, a striker, a goalkeeper, and probably a centre-back are needed. And obviously this depends on Chalobah staying and Gallagher staying, or whether they both go. Obviously for PSR reasons, I think we're assuming they're going to go. So hence I've based this lineup without Chalobah and Gallagher. Okay, so now we have the lineup. How does this team play? What are the tactics? So we'll start with on the ball. And on the ball, as I said, there is a heavy emphasis on one of the fullbacks inverting, normally the right back, or it has been Pereira at Leicester that's been doing that. So immediately, you're in this position where something a bit more like this, roughly. And what this then means is you end up in this 3-2-5 shape with Palmer and Caicedo playing a bit higher. This is why obviously maybe Caicedo on the left isn't necessarily how it will look, and you could actually see something switch a bit more like this, depending on where they start in the lineup and how they transition. But I think given that the fact Ndidi's been pushing high and Harry Winks has been the deep-lying playmaker, it's probably more like this. And what it means is that you then get this back 5 that you can defend the transition with, which is pretty crucial to how Maresca likes to defend with his team. So the inverting fullback is not just crucial for on the ball, but off the ball as well. Now, importantly, the two CDMs stay very close together. They play so narrow that it almost forces the oppositions wide, but it also creates really good passing angles for the centre-backs. And similarly, the left centre-back actually does at times push into a left-back position. And then Colwill will go a bit wider, Fofana there, and Costa can come forward a bit more. So you almost get this back 4. So it's almost like a 4-2-4-1. Obviously, that's including the goalkeeper, but it just means you've got that extra man in the defence. And also looking at this with the 3-2-5, you look at the width that it offers in attack. It actually means that Maresca likes his team to overload one side and then play a switch towards the other side. So if the ball's over on this side and there's a hell of a lot of play almost linking up over here, you've then got Mudryk isolated, probably against his fullback, where the switch can then happen, and then you can quickly attack on the opposite side. And that's something we see Pep Guardiola do a hell of a lot as well, which is where I think Maresca's probably got this philosophy from. But also, and I talk about it all the time, I promise I don't mean to talk about it all the time, but I have to. Look, you get this box midfield. It happens everywhere pretty much these days. I don't know a video where I've not mentioned a box midfield, but it's happened. I'm sorry, it just happens, and it's part of the philosophy. So it's kind of crucial. But what I do like about this system is how whilst the wingers stay very wide, there's actually a lot of off-the-ball runs into zone 14, which is such a crucial area, obviously, to attack and where most goals come from. But you could see the likes of Nkunku dropping deep to pick up the ball and create a midfield overload, or Palmer dropping a bit more central. You get a lot of options for rotations in this squad, and I think that's something that I really like. And as I said, there's such a heavy emphasis as well. Get the ball wide, beat your man, 1-versus-1 against the fullback, get the ball into the box, or at least cut it back or recycle the play, like we see Man City do all the time. So it's going to be something pretty similar to that. However, off the ball, Maresca's Leicester team like to go man for man in the press, and they like to press pretty high, obviously. Such a high intense team, they counter press so quickly. That's why the passes that you see the likes of Man City and Liverpool play are often very short passes, because if you lose the ball, you've got the least distance to run to go and try and win it back. And that's something that we'll see from this Chelsea team as well under Maresca. Now, when defending in a low block, it drops into something more like a 4-5-1. And this is where I've raised a few issues with Palmer in this team in this position. Is if it defends in a 4-5-1, you've actually got Palmer playing as a right centre midfielder. Now, I have no doubt that he probably could do that. Is it his best position though? Probably not, which is why I actually wouldn't be surprised if in defence it sits more like a 4-4-2 or at least a 4-4-1-1, where Palmer's not necessarily solely responsible for his defensive abilities. So Caicedo and Fernandes can get back into their midfield pivot roles, and Palmer can maybe be a little bit higher. So if we win the ball back, the counter-attack is much faster and effective. I'm not entirely convinced, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Because obviously if you have the likes of Gallagher or Lavia in this position instead, it can quite happily sit in a 4-5-1 without any concerns. So maybe you might see even Palmer up top. I don't know. The other thing that's crucial in a really low block is Maresca's team end up dropping into a 5-4-1, where one of the wingers has to be comfortable dropping back. And as we saw sometimes when Gusto would push high, Madueke would sometimes sit a bit deeper so that if the ball was lost, he could quickly get back and cover that right back position. So I have no doubt that Madueke could actually play right wing back. And I also don't see any reason why Mudryk couldn't either. I mean, he's not necessarily the best defensively, but I think he can pick the ball up from deep and defend a bit deeper. He's not bad at defending. So it'd actually end up shifting across something more like that, which is then where, and this is why I keep umming and ahhing over who to have, Palmer would be much better, because you defend in a 5-4-1, Palmer would then end up being more of a right midfielder in a midfield 4. And at that point, you're happy with him there, because then as soon as Madueke gets high, it all shifts across. Palmer can then end up making a bit more of an out-to-in run, ending up attacking zone 14, or at least picking up the half space and creating the problems that we know he can create so often. So I'm a bit confused. Not with the tactics. I just can't decide whether Palmer plays right winger or in the midfield. For me, he plays in the midfield. And I think, counting the fact that he's done it at Man City before in the development squad alongside McKenna, I don't see why Maresca probably wouldn't give it a go. But then I also do, because it's the Premier League and you have some concerns with that. So I don't really know where Palmer fits into this, where Palmer fits into this line. Obviously he starts, that's like not even a problem. I just think regardless of where you play him, his attacking output numbers are probably going to drop a little bit. I don't think we're going to be seeing the numbers that we saw from him last year. Now I really hope I'm wrong on that, I just think in this position, if he's playing in the midfield three, he's probably not going to get them kind of numbers. And similarly, if he's playing as a right winger, very wide to the touchline, he's also not going to be getting them kind of numbers. So it'll be interesting to see where Palmer drops into this team. And I think the fact that you've got to get him in this team then affects the entire lineup around him. Obviously, if he plays right winger, it's probably Lavia that's going to play in the midfield, or Gallagher if he stays. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. As I said, I think a striker, a centre-back and a goalkeeper are needed. For me, Costa's the best goalkeeper option that we could probably go and get. I wouldn't be surprised if Mads Hermansson actually just follows Maresca as well and ends up at Chelsea. And obviously, we've been linked with James Trafford as well. I'm not a big fan of that one, I'm not going to lie. But again, we'll have to wait and see on that front. I think that Maresca has been chosen, though, because of this possession-style football that apparently the Chelsea board was so desperate to have. We didn't want a counter-attacking manager. We don't want a sit-deep manager. Don't want a counter-attacking manager. I've already said that. They want someone that's going to sit with the ball and average probably 60-65% possession over the course of the season per game, which obviously Chelsea haven't done this year. So that's probably a big reason why Maresca's been chosen over the likes of Zerbi. But as I said, there are a lot of rotations that we could see, and it could be a very fluid system. So I don't hate the idea of a lot of rotations, with maybe Madueke coming in a bit more central into a half space, or Palmer coming into a half space, and strikers dropping deep to pick up the ball, and lots of overloading runners. I think that there's a lot that we can see from the Leicester team that would apply pretty well to this Chelsea team. My main concern, obviously, is Maresca's management style, in the fact that he's going to be going from a championship team to arguably what should be a top 4 team. And he's going to have European football. Now, thankfully, we've got a pretty big squad to cope with that. But he's going to have to be able to cope with the backlash that he's almost inevitably going to get from fans. I've kind of spent like the last 2 or 3 hours umming and ahhing over how this is going to go and who's going to play where. The tactics are undeniable. You can see them at Leicester. But the team that he's going to pick, I actually have no idea. I planned an entire Robert De Zerbi lineup, actually, assuming that he was going to become the manager. And that was so much easier. I just cannot decide on that midfield three. But regardless, let me know what you guys think. How do you think Maresca's going to do at Chelsea? What lineup do you think he's going to go with? And do you think it's going to work? Let me know, are you happy with Maresca, or did you want someone else? Go and check out my last video where I discussed some potential other options, but obviously it's looking like it's going to be Maresca now, so we'll have to wait and see. But thank you guys for watching, and until next time, I'll see you very soon.